Hello and welcome to Chat DPS, where this week again we're very pleased to have with us Adam Green, who's joining Adam Cunningham and Robert and myself as we wade through some of the issues that we've had over the last couple of weeks. Now, then some people may remember that we were unable to bring you an episode of Chat DPS recently because AWS had a fairly significant outage. That was put down to DNS issues out of the east coast of America. Big problems. Now then, since then, we've seen many of the people that rely upon AWS for SaaS. They went down at the same time. Quite clearly, we were affected with Riverside. But since then, Azure has been down, again, for the same reason. And it does bring something to the table in terms of, does global cloud provision out of the US actually provide us with value for money? Does it provide us with the security that we actually need? Is it a risk factor that we've not actually had to factor in before now? Now, Adam Cunningham, I would come over to you because we've spoken in the last several weeks about the fact that obviously America won the go to cloud model. And more recently, they've released a paper saying it's hellfire and brimstone. We're going for AI, and everyone's got to get on board, and it's the American model or nothing at all, and what have you. Are we in danger of sort of like going down the same pathway with AI as we obviously have done with cloud?
I think we can do. So it's important to note that, at least from my perspective, with any of the boards that I've worked with and my own business, we now have a business continuity risk for cloud, which has been brought up based off of what's been happening over the last little while. So we're worried about the upstream effects of clouds on everything. From an AI perspective, it's really interesting. As generative AI is starting to kind of take the world by storm, there is options out there for you to build your own models. And you buy the model, I believe ChatGPT's version is OSS, but there's a few different types that are out there where you can get the model and then you can run it locally, train it, and use it for specific tasks, which is really, really probably the best way from a security perspective to run these type of things if you want to put it in your product, especially, because then you'll have a differentiator. Whereas if you run it from online. But the big thing is, where's your data? It's the same issue that we've had since the 90s. So, like, where is your data? Where do you hold it? EY had this problem when one of the backups of the SQL databases ended up on a publicly accessible Azure store. And obviously that's been in the news recently. But so it's still a case of get the basics right. Where does your data live? Who has access to it? And that way then we can fix it. The other issue that we've had, and I'll probably switch over to Robert on this one, but at least when it comes to Europe with GDPR, there's been so many issues and fines with GDPR on large cloud providers now that the companies throughout Europe are starting to look at alternatives to use outside of the model of AWS, Azure, and so on.
So what do you think about that, Robert? I mean, obviously there's been a few things that have actually come up just recently with regards to GDPR instances out of Europe. And I've been hearing stories about new email platforms, new ERP platforms and what have you, and where they're hosted. Is that part and parcel of what you would term to be, I want better governance?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things going on. So there's definitely GRC, governance, risk and compliance issues going on. And there's, as Adam mentioned, there's business continuity issues. So we know that a lot of these American organizations have struggled with meeting the requirements of GDPR, and a number of them have been hit with pretty hefty fines. And I think the issue is sometimes it's almost a business issue. It's an operational issue so much as a compliance issue, where some of these hyperscalers and other very large organizations, they have an effective operating model, and they may decide that they're not going to change it to comply with the laws of a European nation or some other nation, because they'd rather just drop out of that market and avoid getting a massive fine, as opposed to changing the way that they operate and are spread geographically to handle the services that they provide. So there's a bit of that going on. But as we've touched on, there's definitely some nations within the EU that are looking to either their own sovereign cloud capability or they're going on-prem. So there's that sort of decisions that are being made in different countries within Europe, and so we'll see if that sort of starts to get legs outside. But coming back to that business continuity point, I mean, and maybe throwing it back to the atoms, there's a question of, can you really get true diversification? So we've seen AWS go down, we've seen Azure go down, and this has affected essentially the backbone of the internet. It's affected critical infrastructure. I think, from a governance perspective, you'll be looking to sort of ask the question about, can you really spread the way you offer services between, say, two hyperscalers, as opposed to just being geographically spread. What are the challenges there? Should you be looking at on-prem? What are the different options to be looking at? And like I say, if these hyperscalers are becoming the backbone of the internet, can you avoid one of them going down and then taking your service down just because there's so much interdependency? Is on-prem the better way to go? So maybe hand back to the atoms and see what they think about that.
Yeah. As Adam Green, I don't know whether you've actually noticed any trends or whether things have actually started changing more recently. I mean, obviously, we've got customers in very sensitive areas, that are actually sort of like, we've got an AWS instance, we've got an Azure instance, and running those pretty much. Are there any other trends that you're noticing in the marketplace at this moment in time?
Yeah, so definitely. So also on top of this, I'm to weigh in on the whether or not we can build in redundancy. So you had the AWS outage, then 9 days later we have this Azure outage. But then remember back in June, we also had a Google outage that lasted just shy of 3 hours. That was also a DNS issue. And if we cast our minds back to, I remember this date, but I don't remember many other dates in my own personal life. But on the 19th of July, 2024, we also had an outage with CrowdStrike. And because of the pandemonium that created, and airports and airlines were shut from operation, and all this kind of stuff was going on, and there were hospitals were affected, and there was so much going on. At first, it was being called an Azure outage because there was so much interdependency between the customer base of the CrowdStrike and Microsoft client base. So at first, we didn't even know who was at fault. Trend, and it's been happening over the last, I'd say, 2.5 years, where there's a lot of clients starting to look to repatriate, we call it, back from the cloud to on-prem. Because to Robert's point, like, the hyperscalers do hold a lot of the internet traffic. And then if you put on top of that the large telcos that have the submarine cables, and if they have an issue, and Telstra is the predominant player here in Australia, and if Telstra's starting to see traffic that's coming down the pipe and attacking a certain client, then they may still do the scrubbing, or what we call black holing. So you can be knocked off. And then if you're in a multi-tenancy scenario where it's a provider of Telstra that has that happen to them, and we've seen cases of where we've had large MSPs have knocked out a whole bunch of their clients because they've got an issue on their side. So the trend to bring things back from the cloud, absolutely, we've seen, but there has become too much reliance on the hyperscalers and this cloud first movement. But these things seem to go in waves. Like, we had the mainframe, and then we went out to the perimeter, and then we went back to the mainframe, back to the perimeter. And we're doing the same thing around cloud. Cloud's been with us for a very long time. But what it's really highlighted is the fragility of our federated networks and that third-party knock-on effect, and the way that just cascades down the supply chain. So one trend I have seen absolute is, in my business, I specialize in preparing organizations for an incident response and writing their incident response plans for them, and then testing those under simulation and live fire simulation, so that if they do, fingers crossed, end up having to use them, they actually know what they're doing. And what we've had to bake in every single time, and it's like just in the last year, it's become a really big thing, is an actual addendum that is, how do you handle your cloud instance, and what do you do specifically in the cloud? And in that first 1 hour, what do you actually cover as far as what's in the cloud and your third-party supply chain? and then what can you handle that's on-prem with you. And I know Adam's nodding his head a lot about this because Adam and I have both been in the same war room together on at least one occasion. And it's a case of understanding what your priorities are. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations have so much reliance on the cloud that we're now having to push a lot more effort towards how do we respond to the cloud. But if we look at all these outages we've had recently and a lot of high-profile what we'll call breaches, they on the surface look like a misconfiguration and not an actual cyber event.
So how do you manage things when they're that big? I mean, respectfully, I mean, we saw all of these SaaS providers come down, and there was really very little in terms of what we, I mean, if all the SaaS providers go down, that's your Xeros, your MYOBs, or all your financial, your ERP providers, and what have you. I mean, you're gonna run out of the ability to manage a business very, very quickly, aren't you? And then don't even get me started on payments. I mean, there's a whole world of in regards to payments and how those things are actually going to stick together. So, those guys have been putting an incredible amount of pressure, when I say that, the cloud providers themselves have been putting an incredible amount of pressure onto the Australian payments network recently and saying, well, your rules don't apply to us because, we're bigger and we do everything everywhere anyway, and people will come to us. So don't, I'm not really that worried about you. It seems to be, that's a gross, whitewashing of what they're actually saying.
The big players, I mean, I've been guilty of that's our terms and conditions. We can't do anything about it. So sign it or go to the other provider. And that, from back when I worked in very large vendors. But that's why we're seeing another trend. We're seeing a big movement towards sovereign data centers, sovereign clouds. We have quite a movement in Australia. Like we saw it spawned out CyberCX, right? That was their position, was we are a sovereign provider. And Australia in particular has become very focused on sovereign. Obviously, in the GDPR nations, they're also disenchanted with the avoidance of rules that we've been seeing, and some of the fines are being handed out probably won't make a dent. So they're also taking upon themselves to start look for sovereign capability and building those sovereign platforms. I can see that we are going to see a greater move towards the sovereign capabilities in Australia where we can control it.
Yeah, there's a language thing that's going on here, Adam Cunningham, right? I mean, with regards to, we're beginning to hear the federal government actually start talking about, sort of data sovereign services. We're not kind of there yet, but I mean, it's certainly become part of the rhetoric, yeah?
It's being enabled as well. So if we utilize like one of the biggest data center companies in Australia, use NextDC as an example, their current strategy is about being the AI backbone for this region. And they're putting in place the systems and services so that you can set up your own AI features on the sovereign cloud in a data center that you rent the space from. And they can help you with the whole thing across the board. It's quite ingenious. So not only are they putting in the space and making sure that they're AI ready for the big players, but they're doing exactly the same thing for those niche providers or other businesses like Bella, for example. We're looking at what we can do in that space, and having the ability to be able to have a data center, have everything off net, train your models. And I think there's some education that have come out recently for people. At least I'm noticing it, and I'd point to Robert and Adam to find out if you guys are seeing it too. But I've noticed that a lot of boards and a lot of operators out there have now realized that if you're going to utilize generative AI in your product or in your business, you want it to be as biased as possible because you want it to have the right answer for your business. And what's happening is the online versions, ChatGPT, whatever you utilize out there, they're actually built to be as non-biased as possible. And so for your internal use cases, that doesn't work because you want it to be biased to give the right answer every time for your business. So they're starting to see those types of things. And I'll open it up to everyone and just see if that's only something that I'm noticing in my little bubble or if that's across the board.
I think, Robert, I mean, is that something that you've been, I mean, I know that you and I have spoken about this in the past. I mean, but that bias piece, is how significant is that in terms of being able to, I suppose, maintain business operations?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, I've certainly seen it being quite sector specific or industry specific. So taking the legal sector as an example, there are a number of companies out there who will build a model for you, which is specific to your particular organization. And obviously, from a handling of privacy, confidential information, it's very important that whatever you as a law firm, and this will apply to other sectors as well, whatever you put into that model isn't going off to the US or China or wherever it might be. You're staying in control of that particular model. And then that allows you to, I mean, I'm not quite sure how open some of these models are, but the more open they can be, the more that you can actually audit and monitor what's going on to make sure that, so while it may be trained on your particular organization and the data of your organization, you can just check how it's responding over time. You have, as I say, you have control over where that data is going. So I'm certainly seeing it on a sector basis, and I think my feeling is that you're getting more value out of those models than you would be from a generic model. And I think generally speaking, there's some like meta-analysis of how effective using Gen AI is, and I think it was something like, there was an MIT study saying that, was it 95% or more of the implementations were not actually returning any investment, and I think that's because they are generic. And they do lack specific training on that particular organization. So I think what you may see is a tendency to move from the generic to the specific, as businesses actually recognize that it's not just a matter of saying, oh, we do AI, and somehow that's like a magic wand. You actually need to get specific. You actually need to spend some time training that model. You actually need to spend time figuring out what the implementation is and what the use cases are. And then you actually need to spend time making sure that that model stays on track. Biased or not, you've got to make sure that it doesn't have hallucinations and come up with errors. And so there needs to be that human in the loop that's actually making sure that whatever it does is actually effective. So I think that's what I'm seeing, and certainly in the legal sector, and I'm sure it applies to other professional services as well.
So, Robert, are you saying that you should have a plan and an outcome before you start?
Shock horror. I know. Governance 101.
And like you touched on training the model, but the thing is, we've got a long way to go with cyber awareness and people. It is just astounding how much can be done using generative AI and how much you can actually accidentally leak. And, we open up the concept of like shadow cloud is a problem, and shadow, like part of the shadow IT, shadow cloud. Now we've got shadow AI as a problem. And I think organizations do need to focus more effort on actually training their staff on how to use AI correctly, because another trend we're seeing is I will be asked almost daily about an AI usage policy, and I will be the first one to say, I can do your phase 1 usage policy, but then you need to go to someone who's specific on AI usage and putting down all those rules and setting your horizons and everything like that. But I mean, just a grounding to understand how to use the generative AI stuff is, I think, extremely important, because no matter how well we train the models and we do all the other stuff, if the users don't know how to do a prompt correctly, then garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah, I think to pick up on your point there, Adam, there was a recent sort of study, and it released the fact that 54% of executives in America were quite happy using generative AI and pumping in, sort of sensitive, corporate data. Little understanding, I suppose, the fact that it's actually going to be using that for other people's sort of grounding. I mean, is that the kind of perspective that people need to be provided with in order to be able to understand exactly how far they should or should not go?
Oh, they need to understand the fact that you type in something, like an executive types in, we're looking to buy this organization and the buy price is 380 million. And then next thing you know, that information is now in the model and now going to be available. I actually was sitting with a guy probably about a month ago, and he was telling me how he was talking to someone who'd sold their company. And he said to the guy just off the cuff, because he just thought it was general knowledge, he was like, I can't believe you got 38 million for that company. And the guy just looked at him and went, how do you know that I got 38 million for the company? And he was like, I found it. And it was supposed to be a non-disclosed amount, but somewhere, and no doubt someone's put it into a chat GPT or something, and now that is forever available.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a really stunning example. I mean, but there was one other one just recently where somebody pumped up a load of information about the poor people in Lismore. A contractor that had gone in, pumped and put up the SQL or the Excel spreadsheet of all the people that were affected by the floods again.
Yeah.
And that I mean, there's a responsibility piece around that. It's just like, oh no, it was a contractor. Well, no, hold on a minute. What about those poor people?
There was also a case where a cease and desist happened for a large financial organization in Australia, where the company secretary had put the transcripts of their board meetings in to get notes out, and they became in the public domain.
These people sit on the boards of large companies, and I'm sure they must have some devastatingly good decisions behind them. But one like that is an absolute killer, I would have thought. I mean, kills their value in one stone, right?
It's one of those things, isn't it? It's really hard to kind of pinpoint where, how, when, why, and if the company itself has, like a lot of executives now. We did a conference recently. A lot of executives are like, we definitely want to use AI, and then you go, what do you want to use it for? Yeah, we want it now.
What do we want? AI. What do we want it now?
Yeah, 100%, right? And they don't have, to Robert's point before, the plan or the outcome, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're in a business and you said, all right, we should utilize AI more, and people utilize AI in the wrong way, but your only directive was we should use it more, it's hard to state that that person is at fault, right? When you went in kind of blind as a business. So I think it's important to note that these are teething problems as this has come through. People are utilizing it a lot more. So like the idea of prompts, people are starting to understand, the 4 sections within a prompt and how to build it out in a good way. But this is why if you build these systems yourself and you make them biased, then they can be used in the way they're meant to, right? So, we're basically monkeys. So with the monkey sounds that we come out with, we're able to get really cool information from data. That's what generative AI does. It makes that really, really easy. With the prompt idea, we now have to learn a new language to be able to do a prompt. When you build it yourself, you can just ask it a question. It's biased. It comes out with the same answer every time you ask that question. That's the difference between doing it yourself and having it on.
So this whole access conundrum, sort of like multi-cloud, on-prem, this has all got to be part and parcel of the risk profile and the planning that you actually put together so that you actually understand how you react to those things going forward. Fairly significant changes in terms of the planning scenarios, I'm guessing. But I mean, we're beginning to see the use of micro data centers. I work in the financial sector a lot and government sector. Financial sector are already using micro data centers quite extensively to actually distribute their data a lot more as part of a plan around, yes, we're going to use the cloud. Yes, we're going to use on-prem. And, this is pretty much where we're going and what we're doing. And that way we're going to secure these things in this manner. And their plans are pretty tight, as you can probably well imagine. For an ordinary guy who's running a sort of like a mid-size organization, getting caught out these days is an expensive hobby, right? What kind of we've seen some of the we've seen these reports where sort of like mid-sized businesses coming through at in excess of $100,000 a shot for every instance. And then you've got on top of that the reputational damage that goes alongside of that. Now then, Adam here, I mean, you must sort of like, I suppose, have examples of, what you've witnessed. I'm not asking you to give away details of the companies, but I mean, you must be able to actually understand what the consequences of those things are.
Yeah, it's one of those things like we see it whenever there's a breach. The first thing we ask is, all right, what's your backup window? What's your backup strategy? And where did you store the data? And where we've seen it go bad is organizations that don't have a solid backup strategy, don't have a or don't have immutable data. And we've seen cases, Adam and I have seen a case where bringing the business back up re-ransomwared the business because they've gone to their storage and we actually backed up the ransom as well. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done around how organizations are actually petitioning and storing. And I think there's not enough money spent by organizations on the protection of their data once it's been created. And we say the data is the new oil and we spend all this money to use this data, but we don't spend enough money to protect it. But then we do stupid things like use very expensive storage to have the data sit there for 7 years because we have all these rules we have to follow, and Sarbanes-Oxley is probably still a thing. So we have, on one hand, we don't spend enough and get the right strategy in place from the outset, and we don't disperse it, like as you said, with the financial services and planning where it's micro data centers. So there's no orientation of, okay, my most critical important data goes here. This data, it doesn't matter. I can call that and wait 4 days for it to come to me if I need to. Of course, in today's day and age, that doesn't happen. But then using all that really expensive storage for all this crap you're never going to see again. So I think they all go hand in hand, and then you bring DLP into the picture, and that seems to have made a resurgence. Identity and access has started to make a resurgence. So all these things all come together, but then you look at our fragility of our software supply chain and our cloud supply chain. No wonder you've got medium-sized organizations are sitting there struggling. And then let's add something Adam has to deal with on a daily basis effectively, the challenge and complication that's introduced when you have mergers and acquisitions. And you're now inheriting someone else's cluster bomb of whatever they lied about on the questionnaire that you gave them and what they didn't know they had that you discover through an asset discovery exercise.
Yeah, so that's where dark AI really comes into its own right.
Exactly. It's interesting. I always think of the three little monkeys,
Yeah.
And some people are like, I think the level of ignorance across the board is quite high on what their risk is or where stuff is. Like I'll commend Google on one thing. When they do their disaster recovery stuff, they literally turn off a data center. They just walk in and they pull the cable out and they go, the data center's gone. What do you do? I guarantee you, if we got 10 CIOs from different companies on this podcast today, we'd have 10 people that went, there's no. I feel if you're prepared and you understand what the risk is, where your stuff is, and what your plan is, that should be what you do once a month. Pop it out, see what happens, make sure everyone knows where they're going. But I don't know, and I'll put myself in the same thing as someone who owns technology for a business. I'm not comfortable to do that either. So I don't know what the answer is to make it so that we're in a good spot there. But until then, we're going to have this same cycle, these resurgences of technologies. People worry about authentication and authorization. People worry about, it just bounces.
Practice seems to be the mantra, though. I mean, you say you don't know, but you genuinely, you've given everybody the answer. I mean, it's practice, right? I mean, if you don't practice this stuff, I mean, even once, and you're in awful amount of trouble. And running those desktop, sort of scenarios is absolutely critical to any business, not just the big boys. It's all businesses, so they actually understand exactly what, where, when, why, how.
But desktop scenarios only work so far, right? Because people know it's a scenario. The idea of imagine you're a systems administrator or network engineer, and you come in the morning and it's 9 a.m. You're just getting your coffee ready, and the entire system's no longer work. Can't see anything. Everything's gone.
Yeah.
Right. That's the training when you go. This is where you put into practice this academic idea of what happens into what really happens. Which, as you know, is the reason why me personally, I'm follically challenged. Because when you get put into these situations, it's very stressful.
Yeah, but
that's why our beards look a bit peppery as well, mate. It's all stress.
Peppery, mine's completely salt. But the point there is the fact that, I mean, sort of certain organizations seem quite happy to send out spoof emails to staff just to tell them that they're idiots for opening it, but they're not going to go down the path of doing tabletop exercises in order to be able to prove that they're not stupid. Respectfully, 99% of the time they are, or they've missed something, I mean, and it's just like, if you don't practice, you don't actually discover where your weaknesses are, and the majority of those weaknesses are, respectfully again, board and executive level, because they think they're too smart.
Yeah. And I think there needs to be a bit of a rethink, and we're seeing this happen, but a bit of a rethink on the way that we treat cyber awareness instead of tricking people into going, haha, you're an idiot, you clicked on that. It's actually coaching and enabling and creating a culture of vigilance. Cybersecurity is a team sport, and
100%.
running a business is a team sport, right? So we all want to be on the same team. And you look at the way that we build organizations and we put everything together. Like if Adam didn't have really good team cohesion in his technology stack and inside his team of people that he works with, there is no way he would be able to actually switch off at night and know that when he came in the morning, the place wasn't on fire. So there needs to be a greater focus on actually enabling, and that has to come from the top down, because I think we all know who the real problem children are inside organizations. It's usually the ones that go, but I need it.
But I need it. Yeah. Yeah, I had an instance the other week where, sort of like one of the execs had said, yeah, I'm expecting that email. And they said, hold on a minute, but it's been harvested. It's been held back. And they said, no, I'm expecting it. Opened it. And of course it went bang.
Jesus. Yeah.
Because, I mean, again, we all know who they are. And yeah, it's difficult, right? It's difficult.
Yeah.
So I guess any last words of wisdom on this subject? I'll go around the table. Adam Cunningham, any last words of wisdom before we close down?
I think it's all about planning. Understand what you're doing. You don't have to plan so hard that you can't get anything done, but you do have to have an outcome in mind before you start any of these things.
That's perfect. And Robert, any words of wisdom from you around the GRC side of things?
Again, yes, it's all about getting your policies, processes, procedures, get your training done. Don't just throw this stuff in, actually think it through. And then do your testing. So it doesn't just have to be desktop. BCP, work from another location, have some laptops ready to go, send somebody to a different site, see how they operate. Do your DR once a year and run off DR for a couple of weeks and see what happens. These are practical things that should be happening. But I think fundamentally, train your people up. I think the point about it's not just about trying to catch people out, but think about positive reinforcement, think about gamification, think about ways of really positively reinforcing cyber as being culturally important within an organization. And that comes from the top. Yeah, it's top down, got to show some leadership and actually make cyber a positive responsibility amongst the whole organization.
And finally, Adam Green, from you. I mean, you get the final word in all of this.
I could come up with anything, couldn't I? No. So you have to start. So as Adam said, and as Robert said, we need a plan. You need to put it in place, but start somewhere, and don't aim for perfection, because a most viable product is going to be good enough. And 80%, in most cases, if you get to 80%, by the time you were to get to 100%, the game changed anyway. The disruption cycles in cybersecurity are counted in weeks these days. So getting to that point where you're at 70 to 80%, and then you iterate from there, because you're never going to have enough time to get it perfect.
That's ideal. Guys, thank you. That was Chat DPS for this week, and we look forward to catching up with you next.